So, hey, Karen, we finally connected. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing great.
So, I'm looking forward to our conversation this morning. And as I mentioned to you, I've been trying to get a few people on my page to discuss with the people who are coming to my page to find out about, caregivers. And the kind of things that we experience as full-time 24/7 caregivers. Just an idea of what's what are different people's experiences like. And so I know that you have been a caregiver for a number of years, and you have gone through a couple of different situations. And more recently, I know that you're also now entering into this phase of also becoming more of a hands-on caregiver for your parents who are going through some health transitions as well. So maybe you could just begin by telling us in a few words, like what has been your journey so far of being a caregiver, and then I've got some questions I'd like to just throw your way if you don't mind answering some of my questions as well. But tell me what you would like to share first of all with us.
Sure. So my caregiving journey started around the year 2000. My first husband, Dan, started to get, well, at the time we weren't sure what it was, but turns out we found out later it was severe osteoarthritis of the spine. But all we knew was that he was in a lot of pain. And so it progressed through different levels of pain medication that he was on. And the stronger the pain medication, the more he was became in a mental fog, and he couldn't, he often lost touch with reality. He would enter into these phases where he didn't know when he was in his life. Like at times he thought he was 5 years old, or
Really?
he thought that might have been a former girlfriend of his, or
Wow.
that I might be a mother. So there were these phases where he wasn't sure what was going on in his surroundings, where he was, and he would come out of it.
Yeah.
And he would begin to remember again what was going on, and he kind of vaguely remembered what happened in that episode. But all through this, his pain was just getting worse and worse, and he was essentially confined to his bed. So the last 3 years of his life, I was the one giving him and monitoring all of his medication. He didn't trust himself to remember to give his own medication correctly. And so he delegated that to me. I willingly took that on because I wanted to make sure that he was getting all the right meds at the right times. He was with it enough that he wanted to make sure that I was giving him what he was expecting. So I would tell him what I was giving him and in what dosage, etc. And so even though I wasn't necessarily a nurse, it felt like I was acting like a nurse. With medication. But yeah, that's essentially what happened. And then after about 7 years, in 2007, he passed away due to complications of the medication that he was on. It's a long story, which I won't get into here, but yeah, it was a rough 7 years. There were many times where I wanted to give up, but I couldn't, right?
And Karen, were you actually the sole caregiver, what kind of supports did you have throughout that journey?
None.
No supports at all?
No supports whatsoever. I never even it never even entered my mind that I could or should maybe be asking for help. He didn't even like me going with him to his doctor's appointments. I mean, I worked full time, so that would have been a difficult thing for me to do, to book off time to go with him. And I trusted him that he was going to come back with, an accurate report of what his doctor said. And looking back, maybe I should have gone with him. Maybe I should have pressed for more tests and more support. But at the time, I was just focused on, I have a job that I need to do. I'm the sole provider for this
Right.
home right now.
Right.
And yeah, there was just a lot on my plate.
Mm,
And
for
I
sure.
didn't even ask for help.
Right. And that's really interesting statement that you've made right there, because I think, you know, on the survivor side of a situation, it's often true that even if it's not brain injury specifically related, there's just so much going on that cognitively and emotionally, and even mentally, that when people go to appointments, they're not really there. They're sort of there, but they're not, you know, cognitively there. But I can also appreciate for the caregiver as being on that side of things too, as you're saying, that there's often, you know, other things going on as well in your situation. And so how do you take on that mental role for the other person if they still think that they're, you know, able to function, but after the fact you realize that maybe they're not getting the kind of information that they're getting it maybe, but they don't remember, or they don't remember to ask certain things, which then for the caregiver or the people who are trying to support them, how does that impact you as the caregiver or the person trying to support if you don't have all the information? How did you manage that with, you know, the other daily tasks of work and managing the home? What was that like for you emotionally?
It was awful.
Mm.
And compounding the problem was that my husband was he was a borderline hoarder. So
Oh.
there was a lot of stuff in
Mm,
our house.
mm,
It was more than cluttered. It was very full.
mm,
And if I tried to clean some of it up, he would notice right away that something was different or
mhm,
gone.
mm,
And, I'd have to say things like, oh, well, maybe I threw it out accidentally, or I can't find it. So then we would have to buy something new to replace that.
mm, mhm,
So there was a lot of that going on. So it was all I could do to do my full-time job,
mm,
to make the meals,
mhm,
to do the dishes that we needed to eat off of, and to do the laundry. Anything other than that was beyond my mental, physical, and emotional capability to
mm,
do anything with.
mm,
It was just outside of what I could do. And I just
mhm.
had to let it be. But it was a huge emotional burden for me. I would
For
often
sure.
dream that I had a clean house, that my kitchen table was clear,
Wow.
that there weren't things piled everywhere. And I'd wake up and know that that's not the case. And it
Mm,
was very hard.
mm.
Very
So
hard.
that's actually leads me into a question that I wanted to ask you. And the
Mhm.
question really is, can you give some ideas or list some specifics of major trauma that you encountered daily, or, you know, just things that daily threaten to interfere with that sense of inner calm? You mentioned, you know, that your first husband, was a hoarder, and so you would try to put things away or get rid of things when he wasn't looking, or when, you know, when you had the opportunity to. Did that in any way give you a sense of having space in your mind or you know, internally, to have a sense of calm? Or what did that do for you as you were able to get rid of things a little bit at least?
Well, I wasn't really able to get rid of anything until after he passed.
Okay.
So, yeah, after he passed, then it was a huge job.
So what was it like
And
having all that stuff around you at the
it was,
same time as trying to give care to him then?
it was, I felt very crowded,
Mm, sure.
um, physically crowded and emotionally crowded. I felt like I didn't have space for myself.
Mm,
About the only place that I felt that I could have time to myself and a space to myself was when I went and had a bath
mm,
in the bath by myself with the door shut, just me in the tub. And that was my alone time. And I did that quite often. That was my space where I could just go and be alone and
mm,
cry, think, pray,
Yeah,
and try
yeah.
and figure out how to get through the next day.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, many caregivers don't think they can give themselves permission to have any kind of self-care time. And that sounds to me as if that was one of the ways that you were able just to, in a small way, give yourself a little bit of space to at least, if not give yourself self-care, it was a way just to kind of have a safe space to let out some of that emotion, mentally and I'm sure physically as well, that you were feeling through that period of time. What traumas do you think that you faced, or do you face even now? I know that you also have a spouse now who is also in need of some care. What traumas do you face that you think interfere with your ability to sleep, or that even what keeps you awake at night, if anything, even then or now? Is there anything different between even that particular period of time and what you experience now?
Well, then I was always concerned with, and this is essentially what took him in the end, was if there was going to be any kind of interaction with his drugs, was I going to wake up and find him not breathing?
That's a big fear.
And that is exactly what happened in the end. Is that I
Wow.
woke up and he had passed away in the night.
Oh,
So there was always that. Am I or coming home from work? What am I going to find when I come home?
for
Is he
sure.
going to be in pain so much that he doesn't recognize me? Is he going to be asleep? Is he going to be with it? Like, I didn't necessarily know what I was coming home to.
Oh, wow.
I didn't know what kind of things might happen in the night. Yeah.
How did you even begin to manage those kinds of fears, Karen? What kind of feelings were you having?
Well, just the not knowing, the
Uncertainty and
was what I was feeling. How I dealt with that, I have a very strong faith in God, and I would pray, and I would ask God to be with me and to look after him and to look after me. And thankfully, my husband and I both shared that same faith. So we were able to talk through some of these things together when he was in a lucid moment, that he could.
And how frequently would that have been that he had those lucid times?
Oh, it was every day. It's just, I just wasn't sure how long it would last or when it would be, but it was usually every evening we would have a chance to talk.
So more uncertainty in that as well, is that there was never sort of a time when you could say, well, maybe today he'll be lucid for the whole day. There would maybe be a period of time that he would come in and out of lucidness. Is that kind of what I'm hearing you say there?
It's more that he was lucid most of the time, but sometimes his medication was affecting him so much that he would fall asleep. Not that he would kind of go into a fugue state, but that he would fall asleep while talking.
Okay. Oh.
And while talking.
While talking.
And it happened, and I was like, okay, well, there goes that conversation.
So did you? Where did that leave you in those moments? I really would like people to get a sense of some of the emotional, like the feelings that maybe as a caregiver in that situation. I think we get pretty good at trying to hold ourselves together, and people don't always have a good sense of how are we really feeling underneath all of the chaos that sometimes goes with being a caregiver, and particularly in a situation such as you're describing, where there's so much uncertainty and the person really isn't able to even be lucid maybe all the time. What sort of even what kind of emotions were you having in those times when you were trying to have those conversations and he would fall asleep? Of course, not his fault, but how did that impact you?
Well, at the time, I don't think I recognized it for what it was. But after he passed and looking back, I think I was starting to grieve already. I was in a pre-grieving process, because I knew that his life would not belong.
Mm,
And I knew that it would not be a good quality of life.
mm,
So I knew that the relationship that we had was evolving from, husband and wife, to
mm.
more of a caregiver and patient type relationship. I mean, that
Okay,
deep love was there, that never changed.
right.
Um, there wasn't any kind of change that way,
Mm-hmm.
but I felt at times more like a nurse than I did a wife.
Interesting. Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and so a part of me, I almost had to separate myself from that relationship. I mean, I
Mm.
know that sounds odd or
Well,
weird or
you know
whatever
what?
to say, but
Odd is
I just,
I hear what you're saying, but I think maybe I sort of understand what you're saying as well. Um, so you mentioned that you have a strong faith, and you mentioned that you realized that you were going into a grieving process. Did you did you understand at what stage you were in the grieving? You
no,
say that you had to separate yourself. What was that like when you had to physically separate yourself or emotionally separate yourself?
emotions. Yeah. There wasn't any way I could physically separate myself from him.
Hmm.
That's what it is for me to be very physically present.
Yeah.
Um, it I didn't recognize that I was going through the grieving process till after he died. So it was in
Right.
the back
Uh-huh.
that I realized that's what was happening.
Yeah.
But in the moment, all I knew was that he was in a great deal of pain. There was absolutely nothing I could do.
So
Nothing.
powerless, really, eh?
I
Feeling of
felt very
powerlessness.
powerless. I felt
Mm.
helpless.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it was extremely sad.
Mm-hmm.
It was. I felt angry at times.
Mm-hmm. For sure. For sure.
Um, and he actually did try to commit suicide several times.
Mm, wow.
Um, the last time it happened, um, while I understood the root of why he would want to do it, I
Mm-hmm.
actually blew up at him and I said, "That's it.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Understandable. Yeah.
You want to do this? You go into the bathroom and do it
Mm.
so that I don't have to clean up after you." And I
Mm.
was so angry. And I think that kind of shocked him into oh, yeah, okay. So what I am doing or attempting to do is affecting people other than myself. And I think
Mm.
that kind of helped him see what
Mm.
was going on. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, in that process, there was a lot of anger,
Mm.
there was grief, there was sadness, there was helplessness, in a sense, hopelessness,
Yeah. Yeah.
because I knew that there was only one way that, well, actually two ways that this was ever going to resolve.
Mm.
One, and we'd actually started, well, he had started to pray this way. I couldn't pray with this way with him yet, but he was praying, God, either heal me or take me home.
Mm.
Those were the only two. And that was the only path forward that I could see, was that there would either be a healing somehow,
Mm.
whether medically or supernaturally or whatever. There would have to be a healing or there would have to be a death,
Mm.
because going forward in the same manner that we had could not go on forever. There
Mm.
had to be something
Mm.
that happened.
Mm.
And I could not pray that way. I couldn't think that way until probably actually a few months before he passed. And then I also started to pray that way as well. And
Mm.
I would say, okay, God, something has to give.
Mm. So do you
Either he has,
think at that stage then, Karen, I like to unwrap that word anger for when I'm coaching my clients, because we don't often really get the full kind of understanding of what anger is. And anger is really about fear, pain, hurt, physical or emotional hurt, pain, or powerlessness, or all three. And you've mentioned, you felt powerless, which I can't imagine being in that situation. Absolutely. Feelings of powerlessness, hopelessness, hurt, emotional hurt, maybe loss of a spouse. As you say, you started to think and feel more like his nurse than his spouse. So, I'm thinking there probably was a lot of hurt or just emotional hurt attached to that loss. and fear. So can we just talk a little bit about what the fear may have been about at that stage? Because obviously, as you say, he had tried to commit suicide a couple of times, and you blew up. So was there anything around that was about fear, or those things that I've mentioned, pain, powerlessness?
Well, I mean, obviously, if he were to die in whether he took his own life or by other means,
Yeah.
there was that knowledge that I would be alone.
So a fear of being
And
alone, maybe, eh?
for sure. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I had been married at 26, and by that point I was 39.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, and it's not like I'd never had a time in my life where I was alone. I did have times in my life where I was alone.
I hear you.
But at this point, we were actually quite close.
Yes.
Spiritually, we were close in a lot of different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though I know it sounds juxtaposing or opposing, a part of me felt like I had to pull away, but another part of me felt very close to him, because I was the only person that I think really understood what he was going through. Nobody else felt like it felt like nobody else did.
Right.
So there was that intimacy. So I knew that somewhere along the line, that intimacy would be removed.
Right.
So I would be alone.
Right.
And I didn't want him to take his own life.
Yes.
I knew that was not a path to go. That if there was if the end was going to come in a death, I wanted that to come through natural means rather than through his own hand, because I always felt that if it was death by suicide, that I would always, it would be much harder to deal with than any other kind of death. And I'm really grateful that in the end, when he passed, that it was a natural death of sorts, and not out of his own hand. Right. So yeah, there was fear of being alone. There was fear of how to look after him.
Right.
If he should get even worse.
Right.
Like, what am I going to do? Where am I going to go?
Right.
Does he, will he need to go to a hospital and stay there?
Yes.
Will he need to have other care, and how do I afford that? And where, all of those questions. And I don't think any of them really verbalize themselves.
Right. Do you think that that's maybe those are the kind of things that maybe kept you, if not awake at night, that sort of, went around and round inside on a daily basis? Because I think a lot of caregivers, those are the kind of questions, those are the kind of situations that they're often dealing with, right? Especially if they are dealing with someone who has a long-term illness, or they're having to make these big decisions for the other person. Am I making the right decision? Am I failing them? Am I doing this right? I'm not giving them the best care. Am I giving them the best care that they could have? All those kinds of things that you're talking about. There's a huge responsibility attached with it. And then also just the reality that the relationship, as you say, is changing, and that transition of into loss then of, losing that intimacy, losing potentially that person to death, losing the company of another person that you've had in your life for so long and been intimate with. So those are huge realities, right, for many caregivers in any situation where they are giving care to another person, where that person's care is fully on them. It's a huge weight, would you say?
Oh, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
And my health suffered as well.
I'm sorry?
I said my physical health suffered as well.
Absolutely. So that's the other big part of this conversation that I want to communicate to people, is that caregivers actually suffer too, right? We do this kind of role. Not sometimes it's not something that we wanted to take on. It may be thrust upon us because of the situation like yours, or because another family member maybe doesn't want to do this particular role. But it does take a toll on the caregiver, and they do suffer too. And so in which areas of your life do you feel or did you feel the most vulnerable? I know you're going through a situation again as in a different context, but still as a caregiver. Where do you feel the most vulnerable in your life areas, Karen? And when I say in life areas, I'm usually talking about what I call 5 life areas. So family, job, I know you're a busy entrepreneur and also a business person, education or learning areas, community connections, whether that's extended family, church connections, free time, leisure time, where does that fit in for a caregiver, and self-care. So, in those areas, is there one area or a couple of areas where you would say, yeah, Vinny, I felt totally vulnerable, or in all of them maybe?
Yeah. I would definitely top of the list be community.
What does community mean to you, Karen, if I can ask that question?
Sure. Well, interaction with other people, where you allow yourself to be vulnerable with them, that you tell the truth, you share the ugly parts as well as the good parts. Because of how our house was at the time, I couldn't have anyone over. Not a soul. I think I did have one person over once, and I felt so ashamed. And I'm like, I'm not doing that again. And so I kind of, in a way, shut people out.
Yes.
Because I was too ashamed to allow people to see the state of my house. And so the only interaction that I had with people was at my job, which was, definitely more of a work scenario. And yes, I developed some friends at my job, but they never really got to see the inner stuff that was going on. I had some church connections that I connected with outside, like at church, but again, couldn't really, or felt like I couldn't be more connected and involved in their lives and them in mine, just simply for the fact that I didn't have time to spend a lot of time with other people, and B, that I didn't really want to share all the ugly parts of what was going on. So community was a really big area of vulnerability, or an area where I felt like it wasn't what it could have been, or what it should have been, I think.
So having gone through that, totally hear what you're saying. And I just from my journey so far with my mom and my parents this past year, and so I really can relate to what you're saying there, who to let in, who to be vulnerable with, who to be real with, right? What have you learned from that situation that may be different in how you're caregiving now, and how you may be allowing yourself, or are you allowing yourself to look at those areas of vulnerability differently?
Yeah, I would definitely say I'm much more aware of what I need for myself. So I am not being consumed by caring for another individual, that while I'm caring for them, that I am really trying hard to make sure that I'm also caring for myself.
Awesome.
And that includes friendships where I can talk freely. That includes looking after my own health. I've made my own health a priority in the last few years, and working really hard at eating properly, at making sure I'm sleeping well, making sure I'm getting activity, and making
what kind
sure
of activities, Karen, if I can ask, are you doing for yourself, even if it's just a few minutes a day? Because I know, as a busy caregiver, a busy business person, finding time for self-care, many caregivers in that role, say, I just absolutely don't have time. I can't take time to do other things. What are you doing specifically, just in small ways, maybe, that has really been helpful to you this time around?
What I have really enjoyed doing is going for a walk. That's, to me, it's like it's a solo activity, so I don't need to do it with other people.
I hear you.
But I get outside, so I'm getting the sunshine, I'm getting vitamin D through my skin,
yes,
getting fresh air, I'm seeing nature, and it's a time for me to maybe run through some thoughts that are going through my head, or my feelings, and when I can listen to music, or I can listen to a podcast or whatever to encourage me. But it's just that break, that time away from all the other pressures of life, whether it's job or entrepreneuring or caring for family members. You know, I'm not nearly in that same place now that I was then, but there are aspects of it that are, you know, happening in my life right now. So at the very least, you know, I'm mentally thinking about certain things that I need to allow a space and a time to be able to kind of work through those thoughts, and also to get a new perspective.
Yes. I'm really glad you said I'm really glad you said that, because part of what I am trying to encourage caregivers to do as well is to actually find even just a few minutes in their day to actually reclaim that inner sense of calm. I really believe that most caregivers, most women, and I'm passionate to work with women, as you know, most women have got what I call an inner warrior spirit. And we nurture, we give all to, you know, those that we care about, but we often neglect ourselves. And so being able to just allow ourselves to find a few minutes to take back that inner sense of warrior spirit and calmness, to replenish that, you know, all those things that we're giving out, is so important. And so I think just the fact that you allow yourself to find that space is really excellent. And thank you for sharing that part of your journey with us, because I think it's a really crucial piece that people need to hear. It's okay to do that without feeling guilt, without feeling you know, a sense of betrayal to the other person, that you take that time for yourself. What things have you done, say perhaps in the past, that as a, or even in the present, to balance work? I know you've got a couple of things that you're doing on the beauty side, and then you also do some work as a financial planner. How do you balance all of that with your role as a caregiver?
That's hard. You know, I'm not sure I can put it into words, but time blocking, as far as my job and my business goes, you know, I just make sure that I have focused times for different activities. Now, of course, caregiving, looking after another person, you can't time block that.
Right. That's the issue, right? How do you work that around all the other things? Yeah.
You have to act and react in situations that require your attention and your focus.
Are there ever days for you, Karen, where you just think, I can't do all this, I just need help, I just need support?
I definitely felt that in my while my first husband was still alive. Yes, absolutely. I remember very specifically one time I broke down. I was in the tub and I broke down and I'm like, I feel like I need to leave. I feel like I need to get away. And then I'm like, but I can't, because who's going to look after him? But I definitely felt that whole desire to, like, I just need to leave the house for like a weekend or a week. But I never even thought about where I could get respite help from.
So that's a really excellent point right there, that I also was hoping we would bring out, because I think many caregivers, including myself, tried to do it all myself for a long time. And I sort of totally resonate with what you said about, I need to leave, except where would I go? And so the other option was, I need to seek help. I need to seek out some support. I can't keep doing this by myself and run a business and run a home, all those things. And so finally coming to that place of realizing it is okay to ask for help, I think is huge for many caregivers. And then where do we go to ask for help? You know, how do we how do we find people or supports that we can actually reach out to? So I know that there are supports that people can reach out to, and also just even, I think, acknowledging to friends, even if it's just one or two close friends, you know what, I'm not doing well, I need help. And maybe we may be surprised that friends may offer to spar off an hour or two to come and sit with the loved one, or to sit with that person. Sometimes it's the loved one that doesn't want to receive the other person's help. And so we have to navigate that path as well. But would you say that this time around that you have found, or that you may be seeking some supports outside of your situation, that might be another way for you to get that free time a little bit, or
Yes, for
self-care
sure.
time?
I mean, my situation right now isn't nearly as desperate as it was then. But, looking forward into what is to come in my parents' lives, looking for those people that I can ask the right questions of.
Yes.
And, thankfully, I have been able to find someone that I can talk to and say, okay, so this is the scenario.
Yes.
This is what I foresee happening. What do I do? Who do I talk to? What questions should I be asking?
Awesome.
How do we get the care needed?
Yes.
And I think that really helps. Had I had that, in the 2000s
Yes.
with my
Yes.
husband, I think things might have looked a little bit differently for me, for sure. I don't know if it would have changed anything for him. I think his situation probably would have stayed pretty much the same, but I know that I would have had help, and I would have had resources that I could tap into
Yes.
that I didn't even know existed,
Yes.
or I thought that for some reason I wasn't qualified to receive or something, right?
Right. Exactly.
Thinking sometimes.
Yeah, it is. We get this kind of warped thinking in our minds as caregivers sometimes, right? And it is really important that we seek help outside of ourselves, because it's statistically, it's well documented that caregivers will often become even more ill than the people that they're trying to care for. And often, as happened in my situation, the caregiver will pass away before the person that they're giving care to. And so, I think extremely important that you were able to make those, those different choices in this situation, and reach outside of yourself for help. So, having said that, what do you want other families, maybe other who are dealing with this, or the caregivers, what would you want them to know, or one or two specific things that you might want to suggest that might help them to support their loved ones and
Good
themselves?
question. Yeah. I think, like you said, to know that you're not alone, that there are supports out there. And all it might take is you just verbalizing to someone that you need help. And it starts with that. It starts by admitting that you need help and that you can't do it by yourself.
Yes.
And then allowing yourself to receive that help.
Absolutely. That's a big one.
I think there's a level of we call it pride, and I don't know if that's the right word or not, but just this thing, well, I don't need help, like I can do this.
Do you think actually, Karen, that, on that point, do you think that might be also sometimes part of the reason that even family members, extended family, they don't really always see how challenging this role is? And perhaps in some ways, we as caregivers make it look like we're doing okay, when really we do need more help. And in doing that, it's sometimes difficult for family members to really actually see how much we need them to come alongside and offer support.
Absolutely. I know that I did not share how bad things were, because I didn't want people to look at me as if like, oh, well, how come she can't handle this? Or like I don't even know really all the thoughts that were going through my head, but I just know that I didn't share. And I think
Yes.
the part of it was just the house and how it was, that
Yes.
whole shame
Yeah.
thing,
Yeah.
but also that I think people wouldn't believe how bad it was for Dan.
Yeah.
That and he even verbalized that himself, is that he says, you're really the only person who really and truly understands what I'm going through
Mm-hmm.
and how difficult this is. And
Mm-hmm.
I think, we did try and explain to some people, but it just kind of, it felt like it went over their heads. They're like,
Mm-hmm.
oh yeah, I don't think it's as bad as they
Mm-hmm.
say it is.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't see the reality that I lived with, that he lived with on a moment to
Yes.
moment basis.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess even if it might feel difficult to share and to talk about what you're going through, talk about it anyway, even if people don't believe you,
Leave you. Mm-hmm.
even if it's really hard
Mm-hmm.
and you're really opening yourself up to being vulnerable, do
Vulnerable.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
do it
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
because you need it. You need it for yourself. You need it for the
Yes.
person you're caring for.
Yes. Yes. So how do you think for you, I know you're going into this will be my last question thank you so much for sharing so much of your story. This will be my last question for you, but how do you think your life might be in 6 months? I know that you're transitioning into a situation with your parents right now as well, where it's another stage of caregiving at the other end of life spectrum. Knowing what you know now and what you're going through even right now, how do you think your life might be in 6 months if you did the same things that you had done before?
I would be watching my parents probably not get the help that they need.
Mm,
So I would probably be seeing them not living a life that they could enjoy.
right.
So my dad had a stroke 9 years ago now,
Mm,
and my mom has been his caregiver. Well,
mm,
now my mom is starting to show signs of memory loss,
mm,
and so she isn't able to help as much with dad's care. So both of them are going through things in their life that I don't think either one of them really expected to have to deal with.
right, right.
So if I just kind of didn't take advantage of the help that's out there,
Mm,
I think we would be seeing my parents not living quality lives.
quality.
I think my dad might be quite miserable and
Mm,
feel like he has to do a lot of things himself now. And I think mom could, start to spiral into depression
mm,
and not be connected to dad, and that there'd be a lot of friction between the
mm,
two of them. But
mhm,
I think with the proper care and with help, I think that situation can look different, that it can look better,
mm,
that even though their circumstances and their physical and mental issues maybe might not necessarily change too much, but
mm,
at least I will know that I did everything in my power
right,
to help,
right,
and that
absolutely.
I reached out, I asked for help, and that, you know, whatever that's going to look like
Mm,
in 6 months,
mm,
that it will be available and for will be available for them to use, and
yes, yes.
hopefully that the care will be there for them, so that
Mm,
I'm not, thinking and constantly worrying about
mhm,
how are they dealing with this
mhm,
situation or that
mhm,
situation, and, and,
mhm.
and how are they doing mentally and emotionally and
Right.
physically.
Having a much
That
better understanding as well yourself to be able to empathize with the different stages that you may
yeah,
see them going through that they may not understand either. And I would assume is giving you some peace of mind, at least, that
mhm,
you kind of have an idea of where they may be in their
yeah,
journey and maybe what kinds of supports they may need at each stage.
yeah.
Mm. Well, Karen, thank you so much. You've spent good a bit of time here sharing different aspects of your journey, and I really appreciate your openness as well. There's been some what must have been really tough raw parts of your journey as a caregiver too, and I'm so glad that you have now some supports in place and some people in place to walk with you through this journey. And I'm happy to call you friend as well, and just say thank you so much for coming on and doing this with me today. So maybe we'll catch you for another segment, because I'm sure there's more that we can talk about. But for today, I just want to say thank you, Karen. And yeah, we will continue the story.
Awesome. Thank you, Vinny.
You're welcome.